Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're traveling back in time, back to ancient Athens. And we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most fascinating trials in history, the trial of Socrates, our guide for this journey. Plato's The Apology of Socrates.
The apology, such a pivotal text.
Yeah, but it's not your typical apology, is it?
Right. In fact, it's not an apology at all in the modern sense. It's more of a defense, a philosophical statement, where Socrates lays out his ideas and critiques Athenian society.
So imagine it's 399 BCE, the city's still recovering from the Peloponnesian War. There's this, tension in the air, suspicion of intellectuals, and boom, right in the middle of it all is Socrates, charged with impiety, corrupting the youth, the whole 9 yards.
This trial really reflects the clash between traditional values and Socrates' revolutionary ideas.
A real clash of ideologies. It's tradition versus reason, conformity versus free thought. And Socrates, as he put it, was the gadfly of Athens, always pushing, always questioning.
And that's what makes this trial so compelling. It wasn't just about legal charges. It was about the role of philosophy in society, the role of the individual, the pursuit of truth.
And speaking of truth, Socrates had a, let's say, unique defense strategy. He didn't beg for mercy or appeal to the jury's emotions. He doubled down on his philosophy.
He argued he was just following the Oracle of Delphi's instructions.
Oh, right. The oracle declared him the wisest man alive. But didn't he interpret that in a sort of paradoxical way?
Yes. He claimed his wisdom wasn't about possessing vast knowledge. It was about recognizing his own ignorance. And this drove him to question everyone, exposing their lack of true understanding.
So it was less about, I know everything, and more about, I know that I don't know everything.
Essentially.
Kind of a humbling concept, especially in today's world where everyone seems to have all the answers.
Right. This idea of intellectual humility is something we could all benefit from. Socrates believed that his questioning, as uncomfortable as it made people, was a service to Athens.
Look, a necessary irritant, prodding people to think critically.
Exactly, to question their beliefs instead of blindly accepting them.
And that leads us to the heart of the apology, right? The ideas that still spark debate. The pursuit of truth, moral integrity, justice, the individual in society.
These themes are incredibly relevant even today.
Absolutely. Let's start with how Socrates redefined wisdom. It wasn't about having all the answers, but about acknowledging what you don't know.
Yes, it's about continuously seeking deeper understanding. That journey of intellectual exploration never ends.
Which brings us to the idea of moral integrity. I mean, Socrates could have easily saved his own skin, right? Recant his beliefs, accept exile, but he chose to stand firm, even facing death.
He forces us to ask ourselves, what are our non-negotiables? What principles are we willing to face consequences for?
Where do we draw the line? That's a question that resonates through time, for sure. But let's talk about the system that ultimately condemned Socrates. His trial wasn't just about one man. It was a reflection of Athenian democracy itself.
His condemnation, despite his commitment to Athens, exposes the potential flaws in any democratic system.
Right. It raises questions about the relationship between majority rule and true justice. Because majority rule doesn't always guarantee fairness, does it?
Not always, no.
And these are questions that we still grapple with today. The line between individual freedom and the needs of society. What happens when dissent clashes with the will of the majority?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Absolutely. But the apology serves as a reminder that we need to be vigilant. We need to critically examine these tensions and constantly strive for a just and equitable society. But beyond the political and legal aspects, there's this idea of the importance of philosophy itself.
Exactly. Socrates saw philosophy as essential for personal and societal growth. It pushes us to think beyond accepted norms and embrace intellectual exploration.
He famously said that the unexamined life isn't worth living. And he wasn't just preaching this, he was living it.
He demonstrated through his actions and words the potential of philosophy to challenge us, to provoke us, and to lead us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
Powerful stuff. But it's all filtered through Plato's lens, right? We're seeing Socrates through Plato's eyes. There's this element of literary craft at work.
That's true. We have to consider that this portrayal might be idealized. It might be shaped to present Socrates as a martyr for intellectual freedom.
Which raises the question, how much of this is Socrates the man? And how much is Socrates the philosophical ideal? It's a fascinating question to ponder.
Definitely. But regardless of historical accuracy, there's no denying the impact of the apology. It's shaped how we view Socrates, cemented his image as the symbol of intellectual courage and the pursuit of truth.
It's an image that continues to inspire. even today. But that legacy goes beyond Socrates himself, doesn't it? It's about the
Right.
method, the way he approached knowledge and inquiry.
Absolutely. His method of questioning, the Socratic method, is a cornerstone of critical thinking. It's not just about acquiring information, it's about learning how to think, how to analyze, how to reach your own conclusions.
So he wasn't just talking about philosophy, he was living it,
Mm.
embodying its power. And that's what makes the Apology so compelling. It's not just a historical document, it's a testament to the power of ideas, the importance of questioning, and the courage to stand by your convictions no matter what.
Beautifully said.
But I think it's time we dig a little deeper, don't you? The text itself has a very deliberate structure. It unfolds in three distinct parts, each representing a different stage of Socrates' defense.
Right, it does. The first part is where Socrates directly addresses those charges against him. He presents this point-by-point rebuttal.
He doesn't hold back. No emotional pleas, just pure logic and rhetoric.
He methodically dismantles the accusations, exposes their flaws and inconsistencies. He even introduces this idea of a divine mission, arguing that his questioning is, in fact, beneficial to Athens.
So he's saying, look, I might be annoying, but I'm doing this for your own good.
Exactly. He positions himself as this necessary, albeit irritating force, pushing Athens toward greater understanding, a sort of tough love approach.
Interesting. And how does the Athenian jury react to this? Do they buy it?
Well, the end result is, as we know, a guilty verdict. But Plato suggests that some jurors were swayed by Socrates' words.
Right. There was some debate, some genuine wrestling with these ideas.
Absolutely. It highlights that tension we discussed earlier, the clash between those deeply held traditions and the pursuit of truth. And while the tension only escalates in the second part of the text, wouldn't you say, where Socrates responds to the guilty verdict.
Things really heat up. He rejects any talk of exile or a fine and argues he deserves rewards, not punishment.
It's a bold move, a defiant rejection of the court's authority.
He's like, you can condemn me, but you can't silence me.
Exactly. And that refusal to back down, even facing death, is what solidifies his image as a symbol of moral courage.
Standing by your principles, no matter the cost.
Yes. And then in the final part of the Apology, knowing death is imminent, Socrates delivers this final address.
It's amazing, isn't it? He faces his own mortality with this incredible calmness.
He even discusses death philosophically, exploring the afterlife, expressing his belief in the soul's enduring nature.
It's both powerful and moving. A testament to a life dedicated to knowledge and virtue. We've covered quite a bit already, but there's so much more to uncover, especially when it comes to the deeper philosophical concepts at play. Where should we go next in our deep dive?
Well, I think a good starting point would be to delve into epistemology. This is where Socrates revolutionized our understanding of what it means to know something. His statement, "I know that I know nothing," is central to his approach. But what does it actually mean? Is he really claiming complete ignorance?
It seems more nuanced than that, like he's acknowledging the limitations of human knowledge.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that our understanding is always incomplete. And it's that awareness that drives genuine intellectual curiosity.
That's so relevant today, don't you think?
Mm.
We're constantly bombarded with information, but rarely encouraged to question it, to admit that we might not have all the answers.
Right. And that ties into his method of questioning. He didn't focus on giving definitive answers. He used questions to guide people through reasoning, through self-discovery.
So it's more about, let's figure this out together, rather than, here's the answer.
Exactly. It's a powerful method, especially in a world that often seems dominated by strong opinions and, let's face it, polarized viewpoints.
For sure. And that approach to knowledge has implications way beyond philosophy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It affects how we approach education, science, politics, even our personal relationships.
Absolutely. It encourages us to be skeptical, to question authority, and to constantly evaluate evidence, and to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
It's about intellectual humility, something we could all use a bit more of these days. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about another key aspect of the Apology ethics. Socrates' life and his death raised some really profound questions about moral courage, about virtue, about living a good life. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the central concepts here is moral consistency. Socrates believed that our actions should reflect our principles, no matter the cost. And he lived this, refusing to compromise even when facing death. And that forces us to ask, what are our core values? What are we willing to stand up for?
What are those non-negotiables? It's not always easy, right? But Socrates' example challenges us to define our own ethical boundaries.
And to strive to live a life that is consistent with those beliefs.
Which leads to the question, What does it mean to live a good life? Socrates argued that it's not about wealth or worldly success, it's about living virtuously, striving for excellence, aligning your actions with your values.
It's about pursuing knowledge, wisdom, and contributing to the betterment of society.
That's a vision that still resonates today, a life of purpose. But let's not forget the political dimensions of the Apology. The trial itself raises questions about good governance, about the tension between individual freedom and social order.
The fact that Socrates, someone who claimed to be serving his city, was condemned by that very city, exposes this fundamental challenge within democracy.
Right, it raises concerns about mob rule, about the fragility of justice, how fear and manipulation can sway the will of the majority.
We have to consider the limits of free speech, the importance of individual rights, and the mechanisms that ensure justice prevails even when it's unpopular.
Issues that remain relevant today.
Absolutely. And the Apology reminds us that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process. It requires vigilance, critical thinking, and the courage to speak truth to power even when it's uncomfortable.
We can't become complacent.
Exactly. A healthy democracy needs engaged citizens who are informed, who question, who challenge the status quo. And Socrates, through his life and his trial, embodies that ideal of active citizenship.
He inspires us to think critically, to hold our leaders accountable, and to strive for a just and equitable world. But let's not overlook those existential questions that run through the Apology. Socrates' reflections on death challenge us to confront our own mortality, to think about the meaning of life and the importance of living authentically.
It's a reminder that death is an inevitable part of life.
Right, but his composure in the face of death, it speaks volumes about his belief in the human spirit.
He believed in the enduring power of the soul and the value of a life dedicated to knowledge, virtue, and making a positive impact on the world.
It's a powerful message. And Socrates, through his life, his trial, and ultimately his death, offers a powerful example of what it means to live a life of purpose, integrity, and an unwavering dedication to truth.
A life worth living.
Absolutely. But we've covered a lot of ground already. The historical context, the core themes, the structure of the text. But there's still so much more to unravel, especially when it comes to the philosophical nuances. Where should we go next in our exploration of the Apology?
I think a natural next step would be to delve a bit deeper into epistemology. Specifically, how Socrates revolutionized our understanding of knowledge.
Sounds good to me. His famous declaration, "I know that I know nothing," is central to his approach. But what does it really mean? Was he truly claiming to know nothing at all? Or is there something more to it?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one we'll explore in detail in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm intrigued. Can't wait to dive in.
Me too! Welcome back to our deep dive into the Apology of Socrates. Before we jump into epistemology, I think we should revisit that idea we touched on earlier about Plato, maybe, possibly presenting an idealized version of Socrates, shaping the narrative a bit to fit his own philosophical ideas. How much can we actually trust this portrayal?
That's the question, isn't it? It's important to remember that the Apology isn't a word-for-word transcript. It's Plato's interpretation of the events, filtered through his own philosophical lens.
Right. And Plato, being a skilled writer, uses literary techniques to craft this compelling story. He highlights Socrates' wit, his sharp arguments, his unwavering commitment to his principles, even in the face of death.
So he's not just presenting a philosopher, he's crafting a character, maybe even a hero. And that makes me wonder, how much of this is the real Socrates, the man, and how much is this sort of philosophical ideal that Plato wants to promote?
It's a tough line to draw. I mean, it's possible that Plato might have embellished some things, maybe exaggerated some aspects of Socrates' personality or his arguments to make a stronger point. Like, for example, the way Socrates uses irony. He says he's ignorant, but his arguments are incredibly insightful.
Yeah, it's like we're in on the joke as readers.
Yeah.
We see the wisdom behind his claims of ignorance.
Exactly. And I think that's one of Plato's goals, to draw the reader in, to make us complicit in Socrates' philosophical journey. He wants us not just to understand the arguments, but to feel them.
It's smart, turning a philosophical defense into this, gripping human drama.
Absolutely. But even with the literary flourishes, the core ideas of the Apology, they're still important. Truth, justice, moral courage. These are timeless concepts.
And that's why it still resonates with us today, right? It's not just about one man's trial. It's about the human condition,
Yeah.
our search for meaning, our desire for justice.
Our struggle to live meaningful lives in a world that doesn't always care about truth or justice.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the pursuit of truth and justice It's rarely easy.
It requires vigilance, critical thinking, and often a willingness to challenge those in power. And sometimes, like we see with Socrates, it requires real sacrifices.
Speaking of sacrifice, let's talk more about moral courage. I mean, Socrates had chances to save himself. He could have apologized, recanted his beliefs, even escaped into exile, but he chose to stick to his principles, even though it meant death. What do you think drove him to make that choice?
I think it goes back to his deep convictions. He truly believed in living a virtuous life. He prioritized truth and justice above everything else. He wasn't willing to compromise those values, not even to save his own life.
It's inspiring, isn't it? In a world where compromise often feels like the easiest path, Socrates stands out as an example of unwavering integrity. He reminds us that there are things worth fighting for, even if there's a personal cost.
It makes us look at our own lives, think about what we truly believe in. What are we willing to stand up for? What are we willing to sacrifice?
It's not always about huge life or death decisions either.
Right.
Moral courage can be about everyday choices, small acts of resistance, speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's about living a life of integrity, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Absolutely. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the impact the Apology has had on Western thought. It's not just a philosophical text. It's kind of a blueprint for critical thinking, a guide to ethical living.
Its influence is huge. Socrates' focus on questioning has shaped so much, the way we approach education, science, even politics.
And his unwavering pursuit of truth and justice, it continues to inspire people today.
The trial itself raises questions that are still relevant today. The right to a fair trial, due process, the right to defend oneself. These are things legal systems all over the world still wrestle with.
It's really incredible that the Apology is still so relevant after all these centuries. It's not just an old document. It's a living text,
Yeah.
speaking to the challenges of our own time.
And I think one of the most important things we can learn from the Apology is the importance of open dialogue, listening to different points of view, and being open to changing our minds.
Socrates was all about reasoned discussion as a way to seek truth and understanding.
And in a world that feels increasingly divided, that approach is more important than ever.
It's about having those tough conversations, listening to people we disagree with, and approaching those disagreements with a genuine desire to learn and understand.
And to maybe even find some common ground.
So ultimately, the Apology isn't just about Socrates or ancient Athens, is it? It's about us, how we live together, how we make decisions, how we create a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. And it reminds us that this pursuit of truth and justice, it's ongoing. It's not a destination, it's a journey.
A journey that requires constant work, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage in honest, open dialogue.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to go back to something we haven't fully explored yet. Socrates claimed that his mission was divinely inspired. He attributed his philosophical pursuits to the Oracle of Delphi, who declared that no one was wiser than Socrates. How should we understand this claim? Was he truly divinely inspired, or was it a clever defense strategy?
It's a fascinating question. It generated so many different interpretations. Some scholars think he genuinely believed in this divine mission, that he saw himself as a prophet sent to enlighten others.
Others think maybe he used the oracle's words as a tactic to deflect criticism and justify his, let's say, unorthodox behavior.
Right. It could have been both, couldn't it?
It's certainly possible.
That ambiguity adds another layer of complexity, don't you think, to both Socrates and the text itself.
Oh, definitely. It raises questions about faith and reason, individual conscience and societal expectations. It really makes you think.
It does. And it reminds us of the power of belief, both to inspire individuals and to justify their actions, sometimes for good and sometimes, well, not so good.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is. But in true Socratic fashion, the Apology doesn't give us all the answers. It just leads to more questions. It makes us think. It challenges our assumptions.
It pushes us to grapple with some of those big questions: the meaning of life, the nature of truth, the pursuit of justice.
And in a world that often pushes us towards quick answers and easy solutions, that invitation to question, to doubt, to embrace complexity, it's a real gift.
It is. And I think Socrates, the ultimate questioner, would be thrilled to know that his legacy continues to make people think and challenge those easy answers.
For sure. We've covered so much in this part of our deep dive. Maybe we should take a minute to recap. We talked about the possibility that Plato might have idealized Socrates.
We discussed that idea of moral courage. What drove Socrates to stay true to his beliefs? and how his example can inspire us to think about our own values.
And we explored the impact the Apology has had on Western thought, from its influence on education and science to the way we understand law, justice, and ethics.
Right, and we can't forget that intriguing discussion about Socrates' claim of divine inspiration.
It definitely got me thinking.
Me too.
So in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift focus a bit. We're going to look at how Socrates' ideas are relevant today in the 21st century. What wisdom can we take from this ancient text and apply to our modern world? What do you think?
I think it's going to be fascinating. I can't wait to explore that.
Me neither. Stay tuned, everyone, as we continue our exploration of the enduring legacy of Socrates and his timeless pursuit of truth and justice. Welcome back to our deep dive into Plato's The Apology of Socrates. We've covered a lot of ground: the historical context, the trial itself, the philosophy. But now let's make it personal. How do these ideas from ancient Athens speak to us in the 21st century? What can we, regular people, learn from Socrates and apply to our own lives?
It's amazing. After all these centuries, Socrates' trial, his ideas, they still resonate. We might face different challenges today, but those big questions, they're still the same. What does it mean to live a good life? How do we balance individual freedom with what society needs? And in a world flooded with information, how do we even know what's true anymore? That's a huge one these days.
It really is. We're bombarded with information, opinions, so-called facts. It's hard to sift through it all. And I feel like that's what Socrates was warning us about, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was very aware of the dangers of rhetoric, persuasive speech that's not grounded in truth or reason. Remember, he was accused of making the weaker argument appear stronger, which, even though it wasn't true, it shows how powerful manipulation can be.
Yeah. So how do we become like Socrates? How do we find truth in this crazy world? Where do we even start?
Well, I think Socrates gives us some clues. His method of questioning, always seeking clarity, always pushing for understanding through reasoned discussion, that's more important now than ever. We have to be willing to question things, even our own assumptions.
So it's about being active in our search for truth, not just passively absorbing whatever comes our way.
Exactly. Don't just accept what you see or hear. Dig deeper. Ask those tough questions. Consider different perspectives. And most importantly, be open to changing your mind if the evidence leads you there.
That's a hard one sometimes, changing your mind. But it's essential, right?
It is. It's about having that Socratic skepticism, not just accepting easy answers, because things are rarely that simple.
True. But skepticism isn't enough, is it? We also have to be committed to the truth, even if it challenges our beliefs, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
That's where moral courage comes in. Look at Socrates. He chose death over betraying his principles. That takes guts.
It does. He shows us that standing up for truth, for what's right, it often comes with a price.
And that doing the right thing isn't always easy.
Definitely not. But that brings up another issue, doesn't it? This idea that today it feels like everyone has their own truth, like we've lost those shared values that Socrates talked about: justice, truth, virtue.
It's true. Our world is incredibly diverse, and with that comes a tendency to question whether universal truth even exists. But I think Socrates would argue that there are principles that go beyond cultural differences.
You mean things that are just fundamentally true, regardless of who you are or where you come from?
Right. Things like honesty, fairness, compassion, treating others with respect. These are things that resonate with us on a deeper level.
I see what you mean. It's not about forcing one set of beliefs on everyone. It's about recognizing those things that make a society just and good.
Exactly. And those values, even though they might be expressed differently in different cultures, the core principles are still there.
I like that. So what's the takeaway? How can we, in our daily lives, be more like Socrates?
I'd say start by questioning, like Socrates did. Don't just accept things at face value. Dig deeper. Look for evidence. Be open to new ideas.
And have the courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations. Listen to people you disagree with. Try to understand where they're coming from.
Because at the end of the day, the Apology of Socrates isn't just an old text. It's a challenge to think, to question, to live a life that's, worth examining.
And to keep those conversations going.
Yeah.
About truth, justice, and what it means to live a good life.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Apology of Socrates. We hope you found it thought-provoking. We hope it's challenged you to think a little differently about the world, and maybe even about yourself.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. And for all of you listening, keep questioning, Keep exploring and keep striving to live a life that's true to your values.
Ah.
Until next time, keep searching for that wisdom.